Tonight, all the hallmarks of ethnic cleansing, an expert's take on a Sky News investigation on the war in Sudan. We look at how more than 100 villages have been burnt to the ground. We'll bring you our investigation into the scorched earth tactics being used in a war that's displaced 8.4 million people. Also tonight, 45 people are killed in a bus crash in South Africa. The sole survivor, an 8-year-old child, will have the very latest live from Johannesburg. Also on the program, the king of crypto sent to jail. Sam Bankman-Fried is sentenced to 25 years in prison after defrauding customers out of billions. Plus, France takes a schoolgirl to court in a growing row over an Islamic headscarf that led to death threats and the resignation of a head teacher. And while that row brews at home, President Macron engages in his latest international bromance with Brazil's Lula da Silva. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. We're going to start with some breaking news on the war in Sudan, a country gripped by civil war that has forced 8 million people to flee their homes and left its population on the verge of a catastrophic hunger crisis. Now, Sky News has helped uncover how more than 100 villages have been burnt to the ground following fighting between the armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces. Over a quarter of those villages have been torched twice, even after they fell under control of the RSF. One expert said events in Darfur bear the hallmarks of ethnic cleansing. In a moment, I'll speak live to our Africa correspondent, Yusra El-Bagir, about what she's seen on the ground and ask whether the world is doing enough to get Sudan out of this crisis. First, here's Yusra's report on the scorched earth tactics being used in Sudan.
In Darfur, where there's smoke, there's usually fighting. And in some cases, the perpetrators make themselves known. Militiamen affiliated with the RSF, proudly filming their ambush with smoke rising in the back. Scorched earth tactics used in the Darfur conflict of the early 2000s, on display again. A team of investigators at the Center for Information Resilience have verified 180 individual fires that have impacted 108 villages since war broke out between the army and the RSF in mid-April 2023. An analysis by Sky's data and forensics team found that over a quarter had been targeted more than once.
There is a clear pattern that suggests that these fires are conflict-related. What we've also seen is that it's not just settlements being targeted, but there is also frequent fires at IDP camps, which would result in double displacement and people having to leave again.
Have you ever seen anything like this, Sanook?
But this scale, we haven't. I have personally not seen this before, which of course is difficult to quantify in that sense. Scorched earth tactics are not necessarily a new phenomenon, but the way that they are being rolled out is shocking.
Settlements in West and South Darfur have been the worst hit, with our analysis showing many were burnt again, even after the rapid support forces took control. Satellite images of Mestere in West Darfur appear to show most of the town being systematically destroyed by fire since October last year. But even before then, we watched from the border as fires ravaged the town and civilians fled gunfire. In North Darfur, the holdout state, there's an ongoing fight for power. And recent fires have been from army airstrikes. This one killed at least 9 people and left 12 families homeless. Nermat tells us they have no water, no food, and no place to live. She says they're gathered on the ash and burnt remains of their homes with nowhere to go, hoping for help. Just one example of the tragedies fueling the largest displacement crisis in the world. A single fire destroying a neighborhood, and a blaze of fires destroying a nation. Yusra El-Bagir, Sky News.
And Yusra joins us live now. And Yusra, you've been covering this conflict for almost a year now. Next week marks a year since this war began, which has seen 8 million people displaced. And now this extraordinary report that you've done on the scorched earth policy that's being used against the people of Sudan.
Yeah, I mean, when people wonder how this displacement crisis is so massive, how so many people are impacted, this is why the systematic targeting of communities on a regional level. I mean, we went to the Darfur border with Chad in late May, and we managed to witness a village being scorched, people running out. And it happened over the course of a couple of days. We then went to a field hospital and saw the wounded coming in. And I think it's very important to note something that our producer from Darfur told us: where there are fires, there's gunfire. This isn't just we're going to burn down a village. This is an ambush. So many of the fires that have been picked up and verified by the Center for Information Resilience do involve RSF attacks, RSF militia aligned with the RSF, Arab tribal militias, targeting non-Arab communities. And then our data and forensics team was able to understand that this was not just something that happened once, or this would be kind of a recurring event where scores were being settled, where people were being displaced more than once. So this is very horrifying. I mean, to see it laid out in these terms through the incredible work of investigators at the Center of Information Resilience and also our own investigators at Sky really does paint a picture of mass displacement, of dispossession, of targeted killings. Now, the UK Minister for Development and Africa, Andrew Mitchell, was on the border with Chad and Sudan today, and he was there to announce that the UK would be close to doubling the aid that they will be offering to Sudan. Last year it was close to 50 million. Now they're wanting to ramp it up to 89 million pounds. We also saw the all-parliamentary group for Sudan and South Sudan come out with quite a strong statement, firstly calling for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Sudan, calling for external countries to stop funding the war in Sudan, funding warring parties and providing arms. And they actually specifically called out the UAE in that statement. And we haven't seen a country do that so explicitly. So that was pretty phenomenal. And then we also saw them ask for unimpeded aid access. Now, aid access has been a huge issue. There's been red tape in areas that are RSF held, with the army indicating very clearly that aid would not be going into those areas. Areas where people are in dire need of some sort of support. Now, in recent weeks, we've seen them allow aid to get into RSF-held areas, but 60 trucks at a time is not enough. And we spoke to the INGO coordinator for Sudan, Anthony Neal, who recently told us that these ad hoc measures were not enough to offset the 11 months of blocked aid. So again, though this funding is increasing, Yalda, it's really probably only going to scratch the surface of a population that is in extreme need for support in this state of ongoing fighting.
Yeah, a dire situation there. Before I let you go, Yusra, I have to ask you about another developing story, that devastating breaking news in the last hour or so coming out of South Africa, where we understand there's been a bus crash. 45 people were killed in that.
Yeah, it's been quite a grim evening, because people are celebrating the start of Easter weekend while we're hearing from the north of the country, the northern province of Limpopo, that a bus taking pilgrims, worshippers to Maraya, which is in the northern province here in South Africa, fell off, swerved off a mountainside, crashed nearly 50 meters. And out of the 46 passengers, including the driver, 45 were killed, except an 8-year-old child. Local reports are saying it's a young girl. She's being treated at a nearby hospital for severe injuries. The Minister of Transport here in South Africa was on the scene, and the rescue operation was going on until the late hours of Thursday evening tonight, where there were bodies being buried under the rubble, bodies that were unrecognizable from the burns. And while this child is quite a miraculous glimmer in this horrifying event, it's still an indication of just issues that the country has around roadside accidents over Easter weekend last year. 252 people were killed in 207 roadside accidents over the weekend. So there is an expectation that there might be more accidents over the course of Easter. But for now, this is just quite a dark mark on what should have been a very beautiful weekend.
Yusra, thank you so much for bringing us up to date on both of those stories from your investigation in Sudan and that devastating situation in South Africa as well. Well, with me here in the studio tonight, World Affairs editor at The Times, Catherine Philp, and the journalist and filmmaker, Shayi Rhodes. Thank you both for joining us here on the programme. We'll just talk about the situation in Sudan because, you know, we don't like the term forgotten wars because there are so many people that are working to focus on these conflicts, but they don't make headlines, do they? Shay, you and I have talked about this before, the fact that 8 million people have been displaced. We see this scorched earth policy and yet very little focus internationally on it.
Very little. And you know, the result of that is only more war and more conflict in the future. The people who are being blamed for these atrocities used to be known as the Janjaweed. And I remember Nima there reporting extensively on them 10, 15 years ago. She's never stopped explaining who they are and what they do. And the fact that nobody's listened is the reason why we are where we are today. Yeah,
and Darfur then was at the centre of it, and it's at the centre of it all again today as well.
Absolutely, and in fact it produced the first indictment at the International Criminal Court for head of state, Omar el-Bashir, who was deposed as leader of Sudan, but has never been brought to justice for those crimes. And you can only think that the same people, or the next generation of people perpetrating these atrocities, look at that and think, there's no prospect of my being held accountable for any of these crimes because he wasn't and no one else was.
Indeed, and we have reports from the UN, from the US, describing these things as war crimes, crimes against humanity, and yet nothing actually changes on the ground.
I mean, it used to be said about the ICC that its problem was it only indicted people in Africa. Its reach has widened, but it's got a lot to prove in actually managing to bring these people before judges and actually get some justice for the people who, for the victims of these crimes, who really don't have very much faith, and why should they, in international justice or their chances of getting a hearing, because they've never seen it happen.
And yet, if we talk again about those who have been displaced, quite extraordinary when we think about these events a year ago now when the war broke out. And we saw British citizens, American citizens being transported out, being airlifted out. And we knew at the time that close to 50 million Sudanese would be left behind to deal with this.
Well, the reality is that people are never left behind. They can flee, and they will when things get hard enough. We know that because we've seen it happen for decades. People have left South Sudan and they've crossed through Sudan, through the danger of Sudan, through the danger of Libya, in order to eventually reach Europe. The numbers of deaths in the Mediterranean last year was higher than it's ever been before. It's already on target to be pretty high this year, and we now know where they're going to come from.
And one of the other things that Yusra sort of talked about, the fact that regionally there are so many different players in this. You know, talked about the UAE, the role of Egypt that has played in this, Russia, you know, the Chinese. I mean, there are so many players.
And it's only got more complicated. I mean, 20 years ago when we were talking about the Janjaweed, we were talking about in terms of international influence, really about the fact that China was in Sudan to exploit the natural resources there and was very happy to do business with Bashir at a time when the US was trying to sanction him kind of out of existence. And, you know, there was enormous amount of attention paid to Sudan then. You remember George Clooney was the great, you know, flag bearer for the...
With his dad.
Absolutely, with his dad. And it was a great cause for evangelical churches in the US. You know, this never again, it was a genocide. The US government declared it as one. That side of the world seems to have forgotten about this. Now, the fact that the UAE have been called out is extraordinary. They are meant to be a stalwart Western ally. Certainly, they're, you know, a government we rely on in the Middle East, despite some of their more nefarious activities. They are directly sponsoring the rapid forces, the people we're talking about committing these atrocities. They are providing them with surface-to-air missiles, with armed drones. I mean, really serious weaponry. This is of a different order to the old conflict in Darfur. On the other side, we have Egypt is actually sponsoring the Sudanese military. So they are at odds with one another, a situation that we saw in Libya, and look where that's gone.
And as to your point, these are all allies and partners, you know, and yet the United States is condemning, so is the UN, but nothing is actually changing on the ground.
I mean, I think that it shows that the world has very limited attention span for certain conflicts, certainly those on the African continent, less than others, but also that we're in a time of sort of poly-crises that are absorbing so much international attention. I mean, Ukraine, where I just came back from, they're feeling forgotten because of what's going on in Israel, Gaza, and what's happening in US politics. So, the ability of the international community to sort of keep a grasp of all these crises and conflicts is really being stretched.
Indeed. Catherine, Shay, we'll keep you both here. But before we go to the break, I want to tell you about an upcoming programme here on Sky News. Tomorrow, I'll be presenting a special programme on Haiti's gangs, which are bringing chaos to the streets of the country. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, has spoken to the notorious gang leader, Jimmy Chirizia, also known as Barbecue, after he forced the serving Prime Minister Ariel Henry to resign. That's a world-exclusive interview. Join us for that and extensive coverage at 2 p.m. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come, the rise and fall of the man known as the Crypto King. Sam Bankman-Fried is sentenced to 25 years behind bars for stealing billions of dollars. We'll ask how he did it and if it could happen again.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place for news.
I'm Martin Brunt and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent and I'm based here in Beijing.
We help you understand the world with us. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Welcome back. He was the king of crypto who tricked the world. Now Sam Bankman-Fried will spend the next 25 years in jail for fraud. The boss of the collapsed cryptocurrency exchange FTX was sentenced today after being found guilty of stealing billions of dollars from customers. Investors, including ordinary people, ploughed huge sums of money into his company. When it went under, the money went up in smoke. Like so many times before, people bought into the hype. We saw it with the Theranos founder, Elizabeth Holmes, and with so many other major fraudsters. People have been taught another harsh lesson, but will they learn? Or could Bankman-Fried simply be a rogue actor in a growing market? Right now, the value of one Bitcoin is more than £56,000. The supposed crypto crash after the fall of FTX seems somewhat premature. So what does the future hold? Well, we'll get that in a second. But first, here's our US correspondent James Matthews' report on one of the biggest financial frauds in US history.
He was the financial whiz kid riding high on crypto success. He could hardly have fallen any further. Sam Bankman-Fried was jailed for 25 years. Prosecutors called him a megalomaniac with a brazen disrespect for the law.
Like I was saying, it's FTX. It's a safe and easy way to get into crypto.
With big money ads.
I don't think so.
And big name endorsements.
Definitely not.
His FTX crypto exchange built a $26 billion fortune.
I'm not an expert, and I don't need to be.
It was an exchange where investors bought and sold virtual currency, like Bitcoin. And while the value of crypto soared, so did the company.
In less than 5 years, Sam Bankman-Fried went from buying his first Bitcoin.
But Bankman-Fried used investors' cash as a personal piggy bank.
You could buy Bitcoins in America, you could send them to Japan and sell them for Japanese yen.
With his financial formula, he built property in the Bahamas, endorsed sports stars, and put the company name on the Miami Heat stadium.
That's a lot of lives to save.
He was the dressed-down celebrity up to 25 on America's rich list, who bought into politics, courting the great and good of the Democratic Party and its like. The empire crashed when the value of crypto plummeted. Bankman-Fried used investor cash to plug gaps in one of his hedge funds, and customers lost $8 billion. He committed one of the biggest frauds in US history, one that raised questions over cryptocurrency itself.
The remarkable thing is that the crypto industry is back at record highs. I mean, Bitcoin is right back to where it was and even higher. But that hasn't really addressed, the fundamental issues around how something like FTX could have happened and how crypto institutions are supervised, whether crypto assets really have fundamental value and how they can be manipulated.
In court, Bankman-Fried said, "My useful life is probably over." For the playboy facing 25 years behind bars, it will be a life less lavish. James Matthews, Sky News in Washington.
And James joins us now. James, I mean, this is such a massive, fall and tumble for him. Just give us a sense of how this sort of compares to sort of other major frauds and fraudsters.
Hi, Yalda. Well, it's huge. I mean, he joins the pantheon of US fraudsters, and I have to say it's not an illustrious bunch. Bernie Madoff, of course, he's a headline act in that game. His Ponzi scheme lost customers more than $60 billion. He was given 150 years in jail and actually died in prison. He was actually mentioned, Yalda, during the course of Sam Bankman-Fried's court case because there were parallels in terms of defense arguments for Sam Bankman-Fried. In the case of Bernie Madoff, customers actually made some of their money back because of the way finances worked out. Lawyers for Sam Bankman-Fried, they said, look, the value of crypto has actually risen again. It looks like Bankman-Fried's customers who lost all that money will get their cash back. Therefore, no harm really was done. But the judge wasn't having any truck with that. He said the fact that crypto was doing well again bore no relation to the crime committed in this case.
I guess the other question is, how did he pull all of this off?
Well, he's clearly a clever individual with financial acumen, clearly, but also a carelessness and a recklessness with other people's money. A lack of regulation in cryptocurrency, that clearly helped him out in this regard, but also, I suppose, people's naivety and the whole mystery around crypto, Bitcoin, and making money in that particular sphere. As I say, his lawyers, they made the point to the judge that this, wasn't a crime really with any human victims ultimately, because they will get their money back. It was rather a brass neck argument that Sam Bankman-Fried carried in to the courtroom, but it didn't cut ice with the judge, Lewis Kaplan. He made the point that despite pleading not guilty, there was clear evidence that Sam Bankman-Fried knew he was getting things wrong, evidence that came from close colleagues who pleaded guilty and testified against him. The judge made the point that there was no remorse on the part of Bankman-Fried, and that really was a key driver behind the 25-year sentence. The judge saying that the punishment must fit the seriousness of the crime, and Judge Lewis Kaplan made the point that this was a serious crime.
James, thanks so much for bringing us up to date. I'm joined now by Josh Naftalis, former assistant US attorney for the Southern District of New York, which indicted Mr. Bankman-Fried. Thank you so much, Josh, for joining us here on the programme. Prosecutors were angling for about 40 to 50 years, so he got less than what some were hoping he would get.
True, yes. Thanks for having me. The prosecutors asked for a really lengthy sentence, 40 to 50 years, and the judge gave half that, basically. So he showed, that he was thoughtful, that he wasn't looking to pile on, but it was still obviously a very serious sentence.
Yeah, and I guess in many ways he was going to use him as an example. If you commit a crime like this, if you commit fraud, then you will face severe punishment.
Exactly, and I mean that's one of the factors that Judge Kaplan is required to consider, and obviously it drove the sentence. That he wanted to send a message to the crypto community, since this is the first big crypto case, that if you steal $8+ billion, it's going to result in a significant jail sentence.
We are expecting him, though, I guess, to appeal this sentencing.
Oh, his lawyers have said that he's going to appeal the conviction and the sentence, and I'm sure that the lawyers are studying carefully the trial record and going to make arguments about why the conviction should be overturned, and also why the sentence itself was just too long, given what their view of the facts were.
And, it is quite extraordinary. We were just talking about this fall from grace for him. I mean, he was going to be once the future of finance, and then he's now accused of being one of the biggest financial fraudsters, since Bernie Madoff.
I mean, I don't think he's Madoff, but I think his fall from grace is really epic in its own way, which is he was the Warren Buffett, the face of crypto. He was hobnobbing with politicians, with Wall Street, and then, today he's going to spend the next 25 years, basically half of his life, in jail. So it's really, in a way, it's a vignette of crypto, which is you can go really high and you can go really low really quickly.
Why don't you think he's Madoff? Because those comparisons were made in court today as well, as we were just hearing.
I mean, there are a few comparators to what SBF was charged and convicted of. Madoff is just even bigger. It was also just a longer-term fraud and just a true Ponzi scheme, where the amount of loss that was suffered is just unbelievable. Madoff was also one of the figureheads of Wall Street, right? He was the chairman of NASDAQ. It was Wall Street itself that was totally shocked by this. Crypto obviously wants to compete in the world of high finance, but it's still not there. This was someone who took a startup from zero to a multi-billion-dollar company and then crashed into a wall. It's just, in my mind, a different from Madoff, who was running an investment fund and said, "Don't worry, everything's safe," and in fact the whole thing was just smoke and mirrors.
And Josh, one of the other reasons, he received this sort of hefty sentencing, 25 years in prison, was because of his pre-trial behaviour. That apparently impacted him?
Oh, no doubt. I'm glad you brought that up. The judge specifically said that it wasn't just the size of the fraud that was driving the sentence. It was sort of two things that the defendant did after he was arrested. First, tampering with witnesses, and second, taking the witness stand and lying. And the judge clearly took that into account, as is his right, because it showed that the defendant was really doubling down on his crimes. He was trying to, tamper with the witnesses and then basically convince the jury there was nothing to see here. And the judge said, if you're going to do that, you're going to suffer the consequences.
Josh Naftalis, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thanks for having me.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. After the break, how one school in France has found itself at the centre of a political storm. The state is set to sue a high school student after a row broke out over wearing an Islamic headscarf. Welcome back. The French state is planning to sue a teenage schoolgirl and says she lied about being hit by her head teacher in a heated exchange over her wearing an Islamic headscarf. The episode has stirred up a major political storm, with the Prime Minister backing the school head, who's now resigned and gone into hiding after receiving death threats. I've been finding out how this controversial issue boiled over.
A country on high alert for terror attacks.
As a measure of precaution based on solid and concrete evidence, we've decided to increase the threat level.
Now a fresh political row brewing in France.
And how one school has found itself at the centre of it all.
So what's caused the latest unrest in France over the safety of its school teachers? It was an incident at the Maurice Ravel Lycée school in February. The headmaster asked 3 students to remove their Islamic head covering while inside, in accordance with French law.
One student refused and later falsely accused the headmaster of striking them during the exchange.
The headmaster resigned after he was sent a barrage of death threats. The French Prime Minister says the state will now sue the student who made the allegations.
And it's opened up a wider discussion.
So how safe are school teachers in France? Let's take a look at what's happened. Dozens of schools have received threats in recent weeks.
A clash between secularism and religion that has proved deadly in the past.
Popular school teacher Samuel Paty was beheaded by teenagers in 2020. The attack linked back to showing pupils illustrations of the Prophet Muhammad during a class on free speech. An inflection point that reinforced France's commitment to the principle.
Car cette fois, c'est tout à la fois un enseignant qui a été assassiné pour le travail qu'il avait accompli, mais c'est aussi la liberté de penser, la liberté d'expression, la nécessité absolue de pouvoir enseigner ces principes fondamentaux dans nos écoles.
And back in January 2015, filmed on a roof by a terrified witness. 2 armed men attacked the headquarters of satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo, killing 12 people.
It was an attack that altered and traumatized a nation.
Emotions drawn up again 5 months ago, when a teacher was murdered in an Islamic terrorist attack in northern France.
And now, with 2 more people arrested for sending threats to schools, it's a stark reminder of a country's intense concerns over its safety. Well, let's bring in Francois Joseph Chichan, former political advisor to the French ambassador in the UK. Francois, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, we're talking about this one school, but this is, as we've said, not an isolated incident in France.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there is a wider concern about what's going on in French schools when it comes to Islamist extremism. And there are a number of incidents that are happening. What happened over the past few days is only the tip of the iceberg, I would say. And teachers are extremely concerned about the level of threats they are facing from Islamist extremists, but also, the wider environment that they operate in, basically, where they have to make daily compromises with what they teach, even the substance of what they teach on a daily basis. And I think that is putting a lot of pressure on them. So the events of the past few days have to be seen in that wider context of day-to-day microaggression, I would say, that teachers are facing when it comes to Islamist extremism in particular.
I mean, in many ways, teachers have been left to sort of be on the front lines of a policy within France and to enforce it without any support or protection.
So I think on the protection side, I think the government is now aware and taking measures to make sure that the safety and security of teachers is being ensured. And I think the decision to remove the headmaster in the past few days in that particular school is a demonstration of that. I think there is a recognition by the government that safety and security is paramount here and needs to be.
Can I just clarify? Did he step down and now he's gone into hiding, or was he removed and put into some kind of protection?
So formally, he resigned for security reasons. But I would suspect, and the government is not going to say that directly, but I suspect that it was a joint decision between the government or the education ministry rather, and the headmaster in question. because yes, for essentially for security reasons. So I suppose that was a joint decision by two of them.
Okay, Francois, I'm just going to keep you there and bring in our panellists because we do still have with us the World Affairs editor at The Times, Catherine Philp, and the journalist and filmmaker, Shay Rhodes. Catherine, this is an extraordinary situation where a teacher has to go into hiding because of the level of death threats. But again, as we've been saying, this has been going on for years in France, and we have heard these cases over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point that is it fair to put teachers on the front line of defending this policy? I mean, the principle of laïcité, I think, which lacks a proper English translation, but something about secularism or neutrality on the question of religion. I mean, it is a decision by the French state to extend that to not wearing religious symbols in schools. They don't have to do that. That's not written into the constitution, although the principle of laïcité is. So, no, of course, it has been focused a lot on Islam, but it's true that, you know, a Jewish student can't wear a kippah in a school. You can't wear a large crucifix. Should teachers be the ones who have to enforce this law?
And be then so exposed to the sorts of things that we're hearing and seeing, this rift between teachers and the students because of a policy that teachers feel they have no choice but to sort of enforce.
Absolutely, and you know, I've got friends and family in France and friends who are teachers in France, and for them one of the most uncomfortable subjects when talking to Muslim students is when the subject of laïcité is brought up, and it's become a standard line for a cheeky teenager to say, well, but miss, how come my little brother can have Father Christmas in his primary school, but I'm not allowed to wear X, Y, or Z in secondary school? And her line, my relative's line is, because it says so here. And that's it. She doesn't get bogged down in the kind of moral
but
arguments.
Does she feel exposed?
Well, of course she feels very exposed because she can't.
Samuel Paty in 2020 and all of these other cases that we've heard.
In reality, I mean, extremism and the likelihood of a teacher being directly attacked is still very, very, very slim. But the reality is that your relationship with your students is based on trust. Any teacher will tell you, particularly when you're dealing with teenage girls, 16, 17-year-olds, the likelihood of a girl wearing the standard school uniform, for instance, every single day of the year is quite slim. And as a teacher, you have to decide when you're going to put her up on that and when you're going to let it go. A law like this doesn't give teachers any kind of leeway.
I'm just going to bring in Francois, who's listening, because Francois, in many ways, this debate around French secularism, that in itself is like a religion in France, and very difficult for people in the rest of the world to fully understand and grasp it.
Yes, totally, and that is the case even in France, and I totally agree with the comments that have just been made. I think there is a lot of work to be done in France at the moment to actually explain the concept of laïcité, of secularism, and how it can actually be enforced properly. And I think this is the big task that we have ahead of us, is how do we make this concept, to facilitate its understanding? Because everyone is talking about the ban that is linked to this concept of laïcité, of secularism. But at the root of the French secularism concept is actually emancipation. It's allowing everyone to practice, to believe in its religion, or to not believe in a religion. So I think there are lots of things to explain around this concept, and also how to help teachers implement it in the right way in schools.
I guess not just explaining it to the wider world, but I guess within France, it's a debate and a conversation as well, where people feel that perhaps it's fair or it's unfair, and then it can spiral out of control and become very dangerous.
Yes, absolutely. And when it comes to the rest of the world, I mean, I think this is a very French concept, so it's very difficult to grasp from the perspective of other countries. What I would say, however, is that the opposite model, or the different model from the UK model of which is not secularism, which is a form of laissez-faire, basically around allowing particularly Islamism maybe to be there and to have some of the issues that we have seen over the past few months also in the UK. What I would say is both models basically at this point have failed, the French model and the UK model. So it's how do we go from here? I think this is the important question, and the question we have to face now.
Yeah, I mean, Catherine, there's also so many other issues. It's not just about this concept. There are layers of issues around the treatment of immigrants who live in France, the divide and separation of these communities. And so therefore, these sorts of things then can spiral out of control.
Yeah, and I think it's very easy to seek refuge in the concept of laïcité and deny the fact that legislative decisions have been made on the basis of that principle, that the principle does not necessarily lead you to that law, but that a choice has been made.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of a wider issue within France.
Without a doubt. I mean, today we're talking about headscarves and abayas, but there's already an issue in French schools, for instance, of school meals being centrally allocated, and so Muslim students will often be expected to eat pork. That'll be the only thing offered to them. The older students will often leave. They'll go off and get chicken and chips somewhere else, and whether or not they come back to school, on a Friday, particularly Friday afternoon, they might not come back at all. And teachers have been dealing with this sort of thing for a long time. It's a daily, a regular occurrence, which has massively affected their ability to make these young people feel like they are French and that they're part of, and they're welcomed and part of the community that they live in.
And as you said earlier, we're still, I mean, the level of attacks and threats are still, relatively low. We can name the incidents that have occurred, but it's so easy, isn't it, for rumours and things that are said online for it to suddenly escalate and turn into something completely different.
This has happened multiple times in France, and I think I've been saying this for a number of years. I don't want to be right, but every summer I look at the situation in France, and I wonder, is this the year when it all kicks off again? It's happened before. We've now got the Olympics coming up in France, and we have a large number of people, particularly in Paris, in that area, who have noticed that the Olympics doesn't include them as much. And that happened here in London as well. Those people were already disgruntled for reasons which we've alluded to. Are they going to get through the summer without something big happening?
Yeah.
It's a big question.
Big question, deeply worrying. Francois, Youssef, Shishan, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, staying with France after the break, Emmanuel Macron's latest bromance abroad from America to Brazil. We'll explore some of Emmanuel Macron's most famous friendships.
And in Sky News at 10 with me, Anna Botting, the boss of Thames Water, says customers' bills might have to rise by 40% after the firm's shareholders said there's no more cash in the pipeline. Plus, we reveal evidence which suggests money paid by sub-postmasters to cover shortfalls in their accounts caused by the faulty Horizon computer system may have been funneled into post office profits. That's all from 10 o'clock.
This will require mountaineering skills. Beaks come in useful as ice picks. And tobogganing is a quick way down.
Well, I have the pleasure of curating them for this album that Dolby commissioned, 7 Sonic Wonders. And so I wanted to include sounds from across the planet, from a glacier in Iceland right down to the sounds of a frog chorus in the tropical parts of Panama, but also sounds closer to home, starlings, a great murmuration of birds, the Ring Angels track. So it was difficult to choose 7 tracks, but I wanted to give a sort of wide geographical range, and also sounds that I just found astonishing, as well as sounds that we need to consider as regards protecting the habitats in which they happen.
That's amazing. Chris, tell us more about the whale sounds.
Well, I think that they're humpback whales, and they're singing on their migration route down the North Atlantic to the Silver Bank. And what I found fascinating about that is that not only the songs of the whales themselves, but the acoustic of their environment. I heard for the first time this remarkable cathedral-like space around the whales, and that's something I wanted to include, and that's the thing that Dolby Atmos does. It spatializes the sound, so I can take the listener to where my microphones or hydrophones were in this case when I made the recordings. Not just conventional microphones like the ones that we're using now, but also for the whales, underwater microphones, which are called hydrophones. And sometimes I'm really interested in putting, like the microphones I'm wearing now, and you've got on, these tiny personal microphones. And I often think there are much more interesting places to put those microphones other than on people sometimes, because it allows you to get them into these magical spaces and tune into the natural world in a way that we rarely get the opportunity of hearing.
Welcome back. Tonight we've discussed how domestic politics might be causing a bit of a headache for the French president right now, but on the world stage, that couldn't be further from the truth. Mr. Macron has been enjoying spending time with President of Brazil, Lula da Silva. It got me thinking about some of his other bromances. Have a look.
Des yeux qui font baisser les miens, un rire qui se perd sur sa bouche, voilà le portrait sans retouche de l'homme auquel j'appartiens. Quand il me prend dans ses bras, qu'il me parle tout bas, je vois la vie en rose. Il me dit des mots d'amour.
Yesterday, we had a wonderful visit to Mount Vernon, a place that is truly special in the history of this very remarkable friendship.
Dans mon cœur, une part de bonheur dont je connais la cause.
We have to make him perfect. He is perfect.
Pour lui dans la vie, il me l'a dit, l'a juré pour la vie.
My panellists, Catherine and Shay, are here with me. I mean, the man knows how to do a bromance.
I think Rishi Sunak may be feeling a little wounded that you left out his encounter there.
Yes, it's true.
But I always wonder how the one leader feels when Macron moves on to the next.
Does he have a sort of a case of moving on?
Well, I mean, it is so. He might just want to share the love.
My favourite moments are always Macron with Trudeau. The two of them are just like such...
Who's more handsome?
I know.
Oh, now Catherine's going into a whole other bit of territory.
You see, this is a whole... that might be how some people look at it, but I think for them, they feel like together we're both
Taking
equally
on the
handsome,
world.
and now we're double handsome. Hey, look at us, and they love it. I just love the excitement that he has whenever he sees Trudeau coming towards him as well.
It is quite extraordinary to see the level of... I'm trying to have a serious conversation with you, Catherine, a serious geopolitical conversation about bromance, because actually it is...
It's very effective. I mean, it worked with Trump until it didn't. I mean, he did also lay on the military parade. went down well. I mean, he's remarkably profligate with his affections for a man who's been with the same woman for over 30 years.
I mean, there's a lot of kissing, a lot of hand-holding.
But I think it's more serious on a more serious geopolitical angle. Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor,
does he get kisses?
No, not so much. I think I don't know whether it's the sort of froideur coming from his direction, or but you know, the French-German relationship, as we know, is not all it could be right now, and I just don't see the Mr. Scholz going for Macron's charms.
I saw an awkward picture of him with Orban as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know if those two men are sort of the kissing type. I can't imagine Orban or Scholz.
Well, I mean, Trump claimed he was a germaphobe, but
yeah, not with the French. But before we go, I want to show you guys this picture from last week, which was of Macron, you know, kind of at the gym, boxing. You can see it there. So, you know, there's this kind of a changing of the image a little bit as well. You know, you can see that he's always kind of reinventing himself.
It's really important for him. He's been president for a while now. There aren't many people competing against him who have the same kind of status and authority and presence in French public's mind. So it's really important for him to get these images out there of him looking statesman-like and well-loved by everyone.
And strong. Thank you both for joining us here on the programme. Well, that's all for tonight's programme. The News at 10 is next, and we'll be back next week for The World. Good night.